Hello, this is Raya Morris Edwards. I am the author of the Sovereign Mountain series, as well as an upcoming book, Hit the Road Cowboy, which comes out on July 3rd. And I am so excited to be here today to talk about not only my upcoming release, but also some exciting news about what's to come for 2026, 2027, and beyond.
Welcome to Love Letters and Books, a podcast for anyone who loves a good story. This is a soft space to explore romance and books, where no topic is too taboo. I'm your host, Casey, and this week I am sitting down with author Raya Morris Edwards. We're touching on her recent release, Jensen, and getting an update on Jack. I also ask questions about my favorite character that she's ever written, the emotional menace known as Brothers Boyd. We're also talking about her upcoming books, Hit the Road Cowboy and West of Eden. Raya, welcome back to the Love Letters and Books podcast. I am so glad you're here.
I am so excited to be here, and I'm so excited, especially to talk about the book that we are going to be discussing, which is Hit the Road Cowboy, which is my July 3rd release.
Let's just dive in by picking up where we left off. When you were last here, you were talking about your book, Jensen, and it hadn't come out yet. And since then, I have said on this podcast a few times, and I think I've posted about it, I think that is my favorite book you've ever written, which I also say every time you put out a book, so I am not to be trusted. But it truly was. It really just, the story, the characters, the emotion, the feelings, just everything about it, I loved. So let's just start there for a second. What was that book like for you? And now that you're looking sort of back in the rear view mirror.
I have the most probably annoying artsy response to writing it. I booked an Airbnb. I was very burnt out at the time, and I booked an Airbnb, and I was there for a couple weeks, I think. And I was doing this elimination diet. I have a lot of food allergy problems. And so I just had 18 steaks in my fridge, and I was by myself, and I had no car. So I couldn't leave the Airbnb, which was on purpose. And I just wrote the bulk of that book in that time frame. And it felt like a fever dream. It was very strange. It was very odd. It was very isolating, but I don't think that I could have written that book in the normal method that I usually do, which is, I usually get up every morning and I write X amount of words. And the reason I think that it worked so well is, for one, it has a really different feel to it. I would say it's dark cowboy meets Southern Gothic to some degree. And I wanted it to feel very fast paced, as well as feel like there was a continuous tension building throughout the whole book. And then it built to a crescendo, which I think is why it was important for me to sit down and write it at such a fast pace, to just keep it going and going and going and going until the end. So I would say, on a technical level, that was one of the more difficult books, because I've never written action suspense. I don't think, at least not consistent throughout. I have portions of my books that are, I would say, have action in them. So it was a very interesting experience, and I probably wouldn't recommend it because I don't feel like it was maybe the most mentally healthy way to write a book. But I was very, very proud of the book when I was done with it.
Well, as the reader, I just want to say that there was something about that book that was really emotional. And it's interesting because you're talking about so much action, so much. The pacing was really fast, and it did build that tension, but there was this depth of emotion. Those characters, there was almost an ache in both of them that I really felt come through the pages.
I think a lot of people connected, especially to Jensen, to his storyline of kind of just coming from nothing and not really having any help or any assistance. And in fact, sort of entering the world with a lot of things already pulling him back. I think a lot of people connected with that. The story is set in Eastern Kentucky. It's a very under-resourced area, oftentimes deliberately by, things like large corporations, that kind of thing. And it has a long history of that. And so there's a lot of people who relate very heavily to that, unfortunately. And I think that the biggest response that I got that stood out to me the most was people relating to Jensen.
I also felt like the theme of having to fight for things in that book, and that both characters were doing that in their own ways and using the resources that they did have, even if it was really difficult. And I think as a reader, I could relate to that of how almost gritty it can feel when you're in that position,
Mhm.
and what that feeling is when someone steps into your life and they are not taking advantage of the dynamic or the power imbalance, because
Mhm.
I feel like both of those characters had people in their lives prior to
Yeah.
meeting who had done that to them. And it's really hard to connect and open up and build trust and intimacy when that's been your experience so far. Is like, oh, if I even open up an inch, I'm going to be manipulated or used or taken advantage of in some way. And so it's really easy to shut down. But it was kind of beautiful to
Yeah.
see both of them have that process together. And it's interesting also that you were locked in an Airbnb with stakes, because once again, food was a really big part of that story. And I felt like
Yes.
you were communicating so much yearning and nostalgia and ache through what the characters were cooking and eating and how they were using food in that book, which is not a
Yeah.
spoiler I'm going to give away, but it was very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
So,
It was definitely a point of connection because the thing about Jensen and Della is that they sort of meet and they do have a lot of differences. Like he's significantly older than her. They both have different goals. He does not want to go back and she needs to go back. But they have this sort of shared connection of culture where she's making this food and he's like, I know what this is. Like this is a safe, familiar space. And I wanted to be very intentional with the food. A lot of it was food that I ate growing up. A lot of the recipes contain foraged food, like in the scene where he just starts pulling crayfish out of the creek and she's like, time to make dinner, that kind of thing. And so all the food, like you're absolutely right in saying all the food is very intentional. I really sweated over that because there's one thing about Appalachians is they all make their recipes differently and they all insist that they are the only people who make it the right way. So I was like, someone is going to read this and they're going to be like, oh, that's made wrong. Or like, that's the name of that isn't what I used to call it kind of thing. So I was very intentional with that.
well, I want to know what Hit the Road Cowboy is all about because, as I've said on this podcast before, you are already my automatic buy author. So obviously, I was already going to buy the book. Now I just need to know what it's about. So, Raya, the floor is yours.
I wrote Hit the Road Cowboy. I guess I came up with the concept of it and started writing it about a songwriter producer who does country music, who's hitting essentially like a large speed bump in his career because he's so incredibly burned out. I hit on that because I was. And admittedly, I'll be honest, I still am incredibly burnt out. I think I'm starting to come out of that. It takes a long time. That is also addressed in the book, but I wanted to write that out and write out that sort of strange experience of when something creative becomes a business and, becomes commercialized, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. Creatives need money too. It does come with a lot of burnout, and we see it across all creative fields. And so I thought to myself, well, what better way to cure my burnout than to make myself write a book about burnout on an extreme deadline? So that's what I did.
Listen, as someone who I would say maybe 2 years ago, I was saying I'm running on fumes. And I'm
Mhm.
not saying this with bravado, it is just life happening. I appreciate a book written about burnout, whether it's creative or professional or whatever it is. So I think I'm right there with you. And I love the parallel process between your own experience, because as we've spoken about a lot on this podcast, you are putting out an incredible amount of work. You have so many things basically cooking on the fire right now. So, yeah, it does make a lot of sense that this is sort of the theme of the book. And
Yeah.
I think you and I, both music lovers, I love
Mhm.
that that's the background of this main character. So, can you dive in and tell us a little bit about your main male character?
So my main male character is Cohen Taylor, who is the best way I can describe him is what his career is sort of like the Jack Antonoff of country music. So he is a producer, songwriter. He's writing immense like amounts of work for other people. I think at one point in the book, he's like, going to the Country Music Awards is like he's just seeing his work. Like he's writing for everyone, he's producing for everyone. He's kind of like, if you can get him on your album, like you've struck gold, you're going to end up on the charts kind of thing. But he is also doing his own projects on the side. So he also has like a self-titled album, that kind of thing. And he is an extreme workaholic, which, calling myself out a little bit with that one. That was a difficult thing to write, but I also think it was a good thing for me to write an analysis of that. And he has a very close relationship with his agent, Jamie, who is a prominent character in the book as well. And the book kind of begins with him getting to this point where he's like, he's past running on fumes. He's past being like, I have burnout. And he's to the point where he's like, no, like really, like I have a problem. And that's when his agent sends him to a ranch in Wyoming, which is owned by Jamie's father's. I guess his father has passed, but it's one of his childhood friends, like longtime friends. And he likes the daughter, who's the main female character at the ranch. Her name is Sabrina Maxwell, and she is in a position where she's basically never really had the opportunity to do anything else other than be in a caretaker role and never really been able to leave. Her parents are divorced. The only place that she goes is from Wyoming and to New York to visit her mother, kind of thing. And they bond over wanting opposite things, where he's kind of at this place where he needs to reevaluate everything. She's like, my life really never started. And so, yeah, I think they connect over that very quickly. And then, the rest is history.
There's so much to sift through in what you just said. So I don't want to forget anything that I really want to talk about. So I'm just going to go down the list. And the first thing is an interesting topic that you're touching on. It's creative burnout. And I feel like there can be this misconception that, oh, you're creating, you're putting out music or art or writing. It must just be this, faucet that you turn on and it's always flowing and it feels great and it's so rewarding. All of these myths and misconceptions we have about how other people exist. And at the same time, burnout is absolutely a part of that, because not only do you create, but you're also having to market and sell and kind of be received and perceived by other people. There's a lot that goes on. It's not just this like very safe, pure creative space for any of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to touch on that for a second. What do you think about that and creative burnout? And is there anything that you do to take care of yourself?
Well, I could be better. And I think writing this book is part of that. It's part of that process of taking a step back and being like, okay, in order to fix problems, you need to sort of reevaluate them, reevaluate everything. I think that the storyline of Hit the Road Cowboy, it centers around him getting back to his roots. Like, why did you do this? Why did you want to write songs? What are you trying to say? And even though he is actually like a writing and commercial country music, his roots are folk writing, like folk songwriting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of it is going back and retracing your steps and being like, why did I do this? Like, why did I get myself to this point? And I had a moment like during the summer when I was crashing out. I think I kind of like told you about this a little bit, where I was like on a plane and I was like, what am I doing? And I had a friend who she just made a joke where she was like, so you can like buy a mansion or something. And I was like, she was just kidding. But I was like, I thought about it, like I really thought about it. And I was like, I started writing because I thought I had something to say. And I sort of lost that to some degree, like not necessarily in my writing, because I think I've been able to hold true to that to some degree. Obviously, there's some things I write and I'm like, this is just kind of like fun, And I think that's what happens to Cohen is he realizes like he has to retrace back to that, like, why did you start doing that? And I think that is the genesis of sort of unraveling this extreme burnout when you drift, because it really is like drifting. You drift. It's one project where you're like, this isn't too far removed from what I do. And then it's the next, and it's the next. And suddenly you're writing something where you're like, what am I doing? Like I don't like, this is not something that I ever saw myself writing. It's not something I'm connecting with, which I do want to add as like a thing on the side that there is absolutely nothing wrong. And I am a large supporter of writing as a trade to make money because like I have to feed my family. But I think that you can do both. And I think sometimes to avoid that burnout, you have to do both.
I love that answer because it's a really nuanced topic, and I think a lot of people listening can relate to it in their own lives, even if their endeavors are not creative. I think
Mhm.
about what you just said, and it applies perfectly to my professional life. You would be horrified if you knew the things I get paid to write about during the day. And you know
Mhm.
what? It pays our bills, and that is really
Yeah.
important. And it also allows us time and space to be creative and to do those things that nourish
Yes.
us. So I actually
Yeah.
really love that we're having this conversation. Another thing that came up when you were describing a little bit of the different journey that your main female character is having is almost that experience of my life hasn't started yet. Like I haven't
Mhm.
done the things, and I've been in this one particular role, a caretaker or caregiver role, which is a lot of like pushing out energy. It's not pouring back into your cup. So let's touch on that
Mhm.
a little bit and some of the things that come up for your character because of their life circumstances and this position that they've been put in.
Yeah. So that is, I think when I set her up to be that way and him up to be this way, is I wanted them coming at it from completely different directions. And then also seeing that it is not all that dissimilar. And like you were saying, that it is this continuous push of energy out. And even though he is over here like building a career, he is not necessarily doing it for himself. Like throughout the book, there's a lot of him thinking to himself, like, why am I doing this? Like, I have enough money. What am I doing? Like, I can't get off this treadmill and I don't know what I'm doing and why. And I think that sort of loss of self identity occurs congruently with both of them, where she's continuously like her father is, her parents were, or I guess her father was older than her mother. So her father's kind of getting to the point where he's no longer physically able to maintain like an enormous ranch. And so she is now the ranch manager. She has a younger sister. So she is continuously in that. She's like a little bit parentified, sort of like taking care of everything. And I would say that I think you could legitimately say that even though she feels that her life has not necessarily started, that she is also at a point of burnout. Like she's at a point of burnout in her life as well, without even really seeing it, and maybe wouldn't have seen it if he hadn't showed up. Because if you don't have any comparison, you don't know.
Oh, this conversation is just even me, as I'm sitting here having it with you, kind of taking me to all these different places in my own story, which is really interesting because you're saying your main male character is kind of reflecting on his life as well. And I'm wondering for you personally, what did writing this story and bringing these characters to life teach you, if anything new, about this, about pouring into your own cup, about the creative journey, about, excessive output or burnout? Like, did you learn any lessons from them in your own creative journey with them?
I think for every book, you teach yourself something, whether it sticks or not. We'll see. I do think that writing this book, and this is going to sound sort of strange, but that not all burnout is cured by a break, and that it was incredibly helpful for my particular burnout to be able to go and write this manuscript that involved an enormous amount of introspection, not just about the burnout, but also about like what is important to me as a writer. Like, what are my roots? What are the things that initially inspired me? Where do I want to be? And writing all that out. And then also being really, really honest. I mean, I think this is sort of like, it almost feels like I'm describing like a therapy experience, like where I'm having to write out these things and being like, I recognize that I have all of these like workaholic tendency and traits, but I also recognize that I have to write honestly about it. I can't cover it up. And so when you're writing a character and you have to be just brutally honest, you have to be upfront. You can't sugarcoat it. And so there's been so many times where I've texted my editor and been like, just really calling myself out with this one. Like this one's been really tough of just having to analyze it and follow these sort of pathways to this leads to this, leads to this. This is why I'm in this place, that kind of thing. So I feel like I'm still sort of on the journey of understanding what it showed me. But also, when you get to the end, like with a lot of my other books, is there's not really like a conclusive, like, here's the lesson. It's more just like, here's an analysis and a breakdown of this situation. So it is open ended. And I think to some degree, like, we'll see if this makes me better at not being a workaholic. you know, time will tell.
No, that's so honest. And I really do appreciate that in this conversation. And then I'm thinking about that journey of sort of rigorous honesty, where it's almost like a daily practice where you're checking in with yourself and how cathartic that can feel when it's you and you're on the journey, but you're also putting this out there in the world. And I'm wondering what your experience has been with sharing something that can almost be a mirror to someone else and perhaps navigating someone's reactivity to it or their first experience seeing something on the page. Like, what is that like, being a creative and taking the time to get honest with yourself and how you see yourself in the world and putting that on the page and navigating the varied responses? I know we're kind of taking a left turn here, but I always find that this is really interesting. And I can imagine quite a bit of burnout that might stem from that experience of everyone comes from a different place emotionally, mentally, spiritually, financially, and like what we read or consume can be very triggering. So,
Yes.
Raya, to put a complete spotlight on you, what is that like to be in that space?
So I think at this point, I have gotten to the point where when I'm writing about a personal experience, that you have to be able to step back and say, this was my personal experience. And I wrote it the best way that I had the tools to at this time, to the best of my knowledge. And I wrote it and it was true. And if I get to the end of a book where this is like this book, where it's such a nuanced discussion and not everyone necessarily has the same answers, they don't have the same experience, they don't have the same things they pull from it. The only thing that I can do is say, like, was this honest and was this true? And I don't think that it is good to necessarily go beyond that, as long as you're being thoughtful and you're not causing harm to people and that kind of thing. You have to write it, and you can always write a little note in the front being like, this is just my personal experience here. Like, I personally have a lot of experience with this burnout, and not just that, but I would say in this book he has like burnout induced depression. And that's what happens to me when I get past a certain point of burnout. Like, I just, like, the mental health just goes down and down, down. But it's different. That for me personally, that is different than other types of depression, where if I know that I'm able to rework the situation and fix it, then the symptoms, that those, mental health symptoms, they do fix to some degree. But yeah, it's a lot, especially in such a nuanced, like, this book is very nuanced and it doesn't have a lot of definitive answers in it. So it's nerve-wracking, but I mean, you just kind of do the best that you can and then let it out.
That's my phrase for the day. Do the best you can and let
Yeah.
it out. I have to submit
Yeah.
awards this week for all of my writing professionally for the last year. And do
Yes.
the best I can and just let it out and just let it go.
Yeah.
So thank you, Raya. I think that this is perfect timing that I'm talking to you today.
Mhm.
Okay, so now let's shift a little bit to the dynamic between the two of them and the romance that I believe is at the heart of this story between them. Can you tell us a little bit about their dynamic together?
So I don't know if I'm just like in my era of this, but like, he's a very much like a quiet, steady sort of person. I've been writing a lot of like quiet, steady Wyoming characters, and he's very much that. She is, I wouldn't call it like grumpy sunshine at all. I would think they're both kind of like on the same level in terms of that. But she's young, a little younger than him. I think there's like a 10-year age gap. I can never remember like the ages of my characters. So like, that's my best guess. I have them written down for my editor. But I think he is initially drawn to her because of that sort of opposite moving progression, where she is at the beginning and he very much sees things through. He's attracted to her sort of fresh take on things, I guess, like seeing through her eyes. I would say he's on top of being burnt out, he's very disillusioned and sort of just disinterested, I guess is a better word. And she's very interested in things and has not had these opportunities to go out and do things. But I think overall, like what they really connect over, and which ties in, and I know this seems like I'm just talking about all of these different things, but the book ties in, like everything ties in very carefully, where they bond most closely over ordinary experiences, which runs alongside him sort of retracing his steps back and be like, what was I really talking about? Like, what was I trying to write about? I was trying to write about ordinary experiences, which, I think is sort of the heart of some of the, like a lot of this music is, how well does this connect with just people, like everywhere, and their day-to-day experiences. And so there's a progression of people they meet. And this, I don't know why this made me think of it because it's not really that similar, but the structure of their road trip reminds me a little bit of "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" by the Coen Brothers, where they just like meet these random things. And I know that's like the Odyssey, or is it the Odyssey that
Yeah.
it's based off
Yeah.
of? Yeah. Where they meet these random people, and it sort of seems like, why are they meeting all these random people? And then you get to the end and you're like, oh, okay, like I understand why this guy was here. I understand why they were here and these people were here. Even though as you're reading it, you're like, what? So I think there is the strong thematic element of connecting over the ordinary things that bring them both joy. And that is like the heart of their dynamic.
You know what it just made me think of, and maybe sort of the music lover in you will align with this, is that song, which is probably like the greatest love song ever written, Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell.
Yes.
And I'm like
Yeah.
going deep here, but it is. It's
Hmm.
about an ordinary man who has this extraordinary love and like inner
Yeah.
world and emotions. And so for anyone listening, you should literally pause this episode right now and put that on because it's absolutely beautiful.
Hmm.
But as you were speaking, that's what I was thinking about. And I was thinking about that beautiful experience of getting to be a beginner again and to experience something through someone else's sort of like joy and experience with it, and just how beautiful that is. What do you think you resonated with most? Like, are there qualities about each of them that you absolutely loved and you really enjoyed bringing to life on the page?
I think for her sort of like strong openness is something that I really enjoyed. And by that, I mean like she is kind of down for whatever. She's like, I want to go out and experience these things. And she's very open to everyone and always coming from like a non-judgmental place. And I think for him, I appreciate that he's a very thoughtful character, and I enjoyed putting that down. Sometimes, like down on the page, sometimes it was a little like, I'm like, okay, let's move it. You don't need to sit and think about this any longer. But, and I think those are two traits that go well together and complement each other well. Yeah. Now I'm really gonna have to think about that. I would say that's like my baseline answer, but yeah, I'm gonna think about that more.
Yeah. All right. Well, then let's shift a little bit because every time we've spoken, we've also talked about the setting of your stories and how much it plays into, like, some of them set in fictional Montana or, sort of the Southern Gothic element of Jensen. And now we are in Wyoming, which I used to live there on and off throughout my life, and I have deep roots there. And
Mhm.
man, if I wanted to drop off the face of the earth and find myself and was burnt out, I would head to the
Mhm.
mountains in Wyoming and no one would be able to find me. So it makes a lot of sense to me. But to anyone listening who may not have had that experience with it, can you tell us a little bit about the setting and how that plays into this story, like what it offers your characters?
The setting is super interesting to me because with this book in particular, like everything is misleading about the title, about the subtitle, and it's purposefully misleading to make you think a little more about it. And the setting is as well. Like yes, it is a cowboy romance, but it's not a cowboy romance in the conventional sense. Yes, it is about country music, but it's not necessarily about country music as you're thinking about it, like what you might hear at like the CMAs. It's more about origins and that kind of thing. And I think the setting, it's a non-traditional like non-traditional what you would see in Cowboy Romance, where he goes out there, she's already out there, she's already used to living in this very remote setting. He is actually from that area, so he grows up in that area, and then he leaves when he's about 19 and meets his agent, and kind of the rest is history. He's in Nashville for the rest of his life up until this point. Whereas she is very much in this very remote area, which sort of I think leads her to bringing her to where she's at, where she's like, she's ready to see something else. But I also think it's important to note that she is very much, she does not want to leave forever. She just wants life experience and she loves it there. And that is her land. And she doesn't, she doesn't want to leave permanently. But it starts out in this very, very remote area. He goes out there because he thinks he's kind of having his going out into the desert and like finding himself moment. And then he realizes that it's more of the idea, the memories of it that he had are not necessarily the thing that's going to fix him and reset him back to who he was. And that it has a lot more to do with going back to the origins of why he started doing this thing, as opposed to going to a physical place. And so, yeah, like setting is very important because you think you're getting like a Wyoming cowboy romance. And then it's like, there's a little bit of a switch around, but the switch around is happening to the reader as well. In the same way that like, if you hear the title Hit the Road Cowboy, a lot of like, it comes across as kind of like you're saying hit the road cowboy, like get out, like maybe it's an enemies to lovers kind of thing, but that is not what it is. And the subtitle being a cowboy romance about country music is it a cowboy romance? Or like it's very much like when you read it, you're like, oh, this isn't actually about the literal sense of this. It's about a lot more. And you have to kind of like pull apart these multi-layered stuff I mean, it's not like super, super deep, but like there's like a couple steps beyond the surface level.
Okay, well, one part of this book that you hinted at is that they are on a road trip. So, music is such a big part of being on the road. And I want to know from you what would be their top 5 songs on their road trip mix if you could pick them out for these characters.
Top 5. Okay, so there are actual songs mentioned in the book that they do listen to. I know one song that's highlighted a lot that they definitely would have is Fast Car by Tracy Chapman, which I personally think is one of the best songs ever written. I know, like, when people say that, they're like, but I'm like, that's one of the, I think that's one of the best folk songs ever written, in my opinion. I definitely, Tom T. Hall, That's How I Got to Memphis, just because I love that one. For sure, some Bruce Springsteen, maybe like Dancing in the Dark. That one, I mean, that's a classic. Graceland, for sure. Just the song, not the whole album. How many am I to now?
I think we're at 4.
I think I'm to 4. Yeah.
I mean, it's you and me. We both love music, so I'm not going to cap you. So go with
I'll just
vibes
keep
versus
going.
numbers.
Baby Can I Hold You? That's another Tracy Chapman one. It's like all over, like genre-wise. I did when I made the playlist and even in the book, I did make sure to include songs that weren't necessarily country or folk, but clearly the artist had heavy folk and country influences. And then, I mean, you have to go with a classic, which I think, in my personal opinion, nobody come at me. I think Darius Rucker's Wagon Wheel is the best one. I know.
I think everyone's going to come at you.
But I know they are. I'm sorry. There's something about it.
There is something about it. And we all know the song. And it definitely, I think it just conjures memories for everyone. Like for me, as soon as you said Wagon Wheel, I was like, oh, that's Jackson Hole circa 2005.
Yeah.
I was working on the mountain. And, like there's just memories attached to it.
Yeah.
No, I love when we talk about this stuff. Well, I love talking about music, especially with you. And I wrote a piece a long time ago, and it was about the music that kept me company on all of my cross-country road trips. I did a ton of them by myself. And when you're doing that, like, again, no one come at me for like the inherent danger of doing this all on your own so many times. But, you're driving sometimes 4:00 in the morning or at midnight, and it's just you and the straight line through Nebraska. There's nothing else. There's no lights on the road. And I wrote this story about the songs that would constantly come on the radio as you're going through all of these small towns. And it's so funny because it's like on every road trip of my life, no matter what year it was the same song. So obviously it's Journey,
Yeah.
Faithfully,
Yes.
obviously, that like is always playing. Then it's Missing You by
Yeah.
John Waite, which is sort of like the red herring. You're like, why would that song be on that?
Hmm.
Um, Don't Stop Believing by Journey. And then it's just Bob
Yeah.
Seger, nonstop Bob
Hmm.
Seger. It's like trucker playlist. I don't know why it works, but it
Yeah.
definitely does. But anytime I
Yeah.
hear those songs, you can almost
Hmm.
taste gas station coffee and
Yep.
you driving in the dark, and it's just your headlights and no
Hmm.
one else. And it's such an
Yeah.
intense feeling. What do
Yeah.
you think it is about road trips that do make for a good story? I'm thinking of like one of my favorite road trip books ever was Ash Wednesday by Ethan Hawke. And that came out in
Okay.
probably 2004.
I need
Um,
to read this.
ooh, you do have to read that. I actually think you would love
Yeah.
it. Very
Yeah.
beautifully
I'm gonna read
written, very beautiful, very raw story.
this. Hmm.
But anyway, for everyone else who's listening, not just Ray and I having a conversation about books and music, what do you think it is about writing those kinds of stories where you are in literal close proximity, you're barreling down the road, and you're in motion? What does it do to you to be still with someone? Kind of like, what does that bring to the surface?
I think there are only a handful of actual story structures, and one of the oldest ones is the story of going on a journey. And, it can be going on a journey alone, like you see, that's what a lot of the epics were written about back in, way, way, way back in the day. But then you see like more currently, like, I mean, that's what like Steinbeck was writing about. You're writing about journeying, and sometimes that's from something, sometimes that's to something. But when you put two people together, I think that it creates this sort of forced, what's not concentration, but like a filtering of everything else out. It filters the world out because you are leaving behind everything else, all of those distractions, which I absolutely love. Road trips, I love gas station coffee. I love this. Like, this is what I used to do when I was in my early 20s, and it was just me and my tiny little car. Is I would travel a lot by myself and not super far. Like, I lived like on the east side of the United States, and I've traveled a ton through the Carolinas, like that kind of thing. But yeah, it's a way to get away from all of the things that pile up, whether that be your house not being clean or your friends and your family or that kind of thing. And when you do it together, it allows almost like a clean slate, I think. That's a longer description probably we needed, but I was kind of going on a journey there myself, like
No,
figuring
it's okay.
out.
No, that was perfect. And I definitely feel that way. And there is something inherently romantic and beautiful about that. We started this conversation talking about burnout. And I will say in this house, even the cat is burnt out. But like our discussion around burnout is always, I think we just need a 30-day road trip, just us and the
Mhm,
cat on the road,
mhm,
because
mhm.
that's our natural state. We love
Yeah.
being outside. We love being on the road. We love just like exploring and doing our thing. And
Mhm.
so I really resonate with your answer. And I appreciate that you shared that. So, speaking of being on journeys, Rhea, I'm trying to make a great segue here because I see everything you post on social media and all of the things you have coming up and going on in the next 1, 2 years. Can you share with us some of the big creative things going on in your life?
So I also have, in addition to Hit the Road Cowboy coming out this summer, in the fall in November, I also have a dark country MFM Wide Shoes. And I did just announce this. I wasn't able to announce a lot of the things that I was working on over the last few years because of just sort of the transition from indie to hybrid. But I am very excited for this book. I posted it and I was like, this is just so everyone knows, this is very spicy. We're not going into this thinking this is like, you know, that there is plot. There is plot for sure. But this is for the people who love the Spice and Sovereign, who love the Spice and Deacon, who loved sort of that archetype of character. She's just getting both. But oddly enough, like because I don't know why I just couldn't help myself. Like the book is technically about other stuff, but it sounds a little odd to say that I'm writing an erotic romance about grief and death, which is what it is.
This is
But
definitely the
it
space
is.
where you could say that. So
Yeah.
I really feel like this
Um,
podcast is where that would come up.
mhm. But yeah, like it is. It's about like they're all three of them. It's two brothers and her, and they're all mourning like the father figure that was central to them, and in very different ways, and dealing with just like the extreme fallout of estrangement. And so it's a very visceral, sort of uncomfortable book. I have three beta readers who've been reading it as I've been working on it behind the scenes, and I was like, if I'm gonna do this, I have to go all in. But yeah, I would say this is my closest to Southern Gothic. It's definitely got that Gothic. It's dark country. One of them's like they both got driven off by their father because one of them's like a felon and one of them is like kind of basically the same thing. And they just have a lot of problems, and it's very gritty. So I'm very excited for that one. That one has been, I started writing that one like over a year ago. And because of just like the whole indie to hybrid traditional publishing transition, I've had to hold on to a lot of this stuff. So if it seems like I suddenly publish a bunch of things, I've been working on this stuff for like well over a year. I just haven't been able to do anything with it.
And can you remind us of the name and when it is releasing?
So the title is West of Eden, a dark country romance, and it releases on November 17th, 2026.
Well, I love that you shared that. And now I know what I'm running to pre-order. So, Raya, I feel like you have one more book to talk about today, and I want to give you the floor again. Give us an update.
So I've had so many questions about this, and I haven't been able to answer any of them. And I am so sorry. I just want everyone to know I have not been ignoring them, but because of all the moving parts behind the scenes, I have not been able to talk about it. But Jack is coming. It is the final book in the Sovereign Mountain series. It is the grand finale. It's Jack Russell, who we know and love. And that book releases on January 26th, 2027. So it seems like a long time. I promise it'll go by fast. It'll be here. It's worth the wait. But yes, we finally have a release date for Jack.
Oh, I think for anyone who's been along in this journey with you since we opened Sovereign, I think everyone's really excited. Jack is such a key background player in all of these stories. He's the through line, and I think we're all really curious about his book. So, Raya, this has been such a great conversation, such a good catch up with you. And it sounds like you have a lot going on in the next few
Yeah.
years. We're all really excited about that. So, for anyone listening, you can always check out the show notes for links to Raya's social media. And definitely make sure to pre-order the books that have been mentioned today when they become available. So, Raya, thank you again. I love having these conversations with you, and I can't wait to pick up, all of the books that you're publishing in the next 18 months. You're going to keep me very busy. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I always love coming on the podcast. We have long conversations about music, about books, about everything. And I'm definitely going to check out that book recommendation as well.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Love Letters and Books, a podcast for anyone who loves a good story. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow, rate, and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can find me on both Instagram and TikTok at Love Letters and Books. And if you're interested in being a guest on Love Letters and Books, suggesting your favorite author, or just want to write in an original love letter to yourself or someone else to be read on air, please send me an email at lovelettersandbookspodcast@gmail.com.